Now let me tell you about David's tent just for a second. I told you David's tent's different than Moses' tent. So here's your 30-second elevator spill on David's tabernacle. You can always think of Moses' tabernacle, and the difference between David's tabernacle and Moses' tabernacle is, first, David's tabernacle had no divisions inside of it. It was one giant room. David's tabernacle was one giant room. And the last blood offering made at David's tabernacle was at the threshold of the tabernacle on this day when the Levites were bringing it in the procession. They would slaughter, I believe it was an ox, they slaughtered a bull, they slaughtered something. Blood was shed at the threshold, and the ark came into the tent of David through that blood, and that would be the last blood shed in or around David's tabernacle. There would be no more blood that was shed. They would still shedding blood at Moses' tabernacle, but not around David's tabernacle. And then David's tent would be established for 33 years. Everyone say 33. It's prophetic of someone else who would live 33 years. And we've just been talking about the Levitical lifestyle that we live here Monday through Saturday. We pray morning, noon, and night. And we gather to minister first and foremost to the Lord. And so that language and some of the things that we've learned, we just want to help leaders, help communities set a table for the Lord and really learn to love him. You know, the first and greatest, everyone say and greatest, commandment is to love God. And in many ways, what we do is we quantify that by doing things for God. And that is an expression of love, but I love my wife, and a way I express my love for her is I do the dishes. And praise God that I do the dishes. I mean, yes, thank God I do the dishes. There's certain things I do out of love for her that demonstrate that love. But that's not the defining mark of my love for her. The defining mark of my love for her is I understand her, and one of her primary expressions of love, which isn't mine, but it's hers, is quality time, which means I need to spend time with Larissa. So we have a date night every Wednesday night. We spend time together. There's times when we'll put the kids down, and if I'll just start asking her questions, it does something to her heart. And spending time with her, me connecting with her, that is a way that I love her, and God is no different. You have a quality time God. One of God's primary love languages is you spending time with him. And so if first and greatest commands is to love him, we need to learn to spend time with him. And we need to do that not just it is in our closet, like the secret place is so vital, but I believe we also do that corporately, that we set a table for the Lord regularly, that we put resources, time, energy around creating structure for people to love him collectively. And we've really died in that place. Like the hardest thing to get people to come to is a prayer meeting. It's just so hard because prayer meetings can be boring and seem unproductive, but that's an expression of love for him. How many of you, if I were to push play on your heart, you could talk about David's tabernacle, what David's tabernacle was in the Bible. You could talk about it for 30 seconds. How many of you have 30 seconds worth of information on David's tabernacle? Okay, how many of you have no idea what David's tabernacle is? That's awesome. How many of you are kind of like this on David's tabernacle? Like, I kind of get it, I kind of don't. Raise your hand. How many of you didn't raise your hand? A whole bunch of you. I didn't, so if you Google David's tabernacle, if you look at sermon archives, guys preaching, it's not a common topic, what David built. I didn't grow up like erecting, what's the felt board of David's tabernacle? We had Moses' tabernacle, we had Solomon's temple, but David's tabernacle never made the felt board. It never made my upbringing. I don't think I ever heard a sermon about David's tabernacle till I started getting into the prayer and worship movement. And then when I started learning about David's tabernacle, I thought, why isn't this more widely preached? Why isn't this more widely communicated? Because I think the significance of what David tapped into is so crucial. In Amos 9:11, he says, in the last days, or in that day, I will rebuild David's fallen tent. So there's something in the Lord's heart that came forth through the prophet of Amos that David's tabernacle or David's tent, what he established, will be rebuilt in the last days. And I don't necessarily think that it's in one geographical location that a tent will be established and it'll be called David's tent and that will be fulfilled. I believe what Amos was prophesying is that the spirit in which David responded to, or the spirit in which what David possessed, he would use his leadership and authority to build a worship center for the Lord, and that would set in the hearts of God's people to resurrect cultures and environments like that. And you're like, well, that's all Old Testament, bro. All y'all do, David's Old Testament, we're New Covenant. What's up with that? How do we reconcile that? Well, James, the brother of Jesus, reconciled it in Amos 15. At the Council of Jerusalem, James inserts his commentary, or Luke writing Acts, inserts James' commentary around the council at Jerusalem. And they were having this big church argument, which if you've never been a part of a good church argument, praise God. But this is a good church argument where they're wrestling some theological stuff. Instead, after there's been much discussion, three things are highlighted. Something Peter said, something Paul and Barnabas said, but then the last thing is what the brother of Jesus, James, said, and he quotes Amos 9:11. He says, the Gentiles coming to the faith and the Gentiles worshiping with us is a fulfillment of Amos 9:11, which means there will be one central place for all flesh, all man to gather and worship Jesus. He says this is a fulfillment of that. And I believe David's tabernacle is a huge key for us in our hour. And I believe it's something we as a community are called to herald, called to build, and called to help and equip other leaders to do. And so I think it's important for us as a community to understand what David built, why he built it, so that when we say David's tabernacle, we collectively have an understanding, oh, I know what David's tabernacle is. I remember Miller speaking about that. And so we know David, great leader. I love leading leadership principles about David. But I believe that the key thing that made David a man after God's own heart is expressed in his tabernacle. David stood up in 1 Chronicles. If you have Bibles with me in 1 Chronicles chapter 15. We love our Bibles. Oh man, I feel the Lord. So in 1 Chronicles 13, we'll get to 15, but I want to start out with 13. David had just been anointed king. This is a common scripture that I use and present before you. But in 1 Chronicles 13, verse 3, David says, this is the definitive mark of my leadership. Everyone in the nation is listening. Every leader is present. And everyone's wondering, what is David going to say? Because this is the first time he's had this platform. And David makes this one statement that has just marked me. And it defined his leadership. It defines what was wrong in the previous day, but it defines what's right, going to be right in his. And he says this, he says, we're gonna seek the ark of God, for we didn't in the days of Saul. We're going to seek the presence of God. The presence of God is our desire, our focus, our pursuit. We're going to, as a society, put the ark at the center of everything, because for 70 years it had been stowed in a barn. It had been kept hidden because people didn't know what to do with the presence of God. When the presence of God came, people died. when the presence of God came, that sometimes their enemies defeated them. Prior to it being in this barn for 70 years, the Philistines had held the ark hostage, but they sent it back because their people started dying. And so the nation as a whole was just like, we don't know what to do with this box. We have no idea how to approach this box. We have no idea how to set up community. And like, what do we do with the box? Because anytime we get near it, things go bad, things go awry. And I believe Saul was so intimidated of the box that, again, they just stowed it in a barn. So think about this. At Gibeon, at Mount, I think it was Mount Gibeah, was where Moses' tabernacle was operating during this time. Now we know Moses' tabernacle. Moses' tabernacle was the outer court, the inner court, and the what? What dwelt in the holiest of holies? The box. The box should have been in the holiest of holies. Like, I think my 7-year-old could tell us that. And the holiest of holies was the box. But for 70 years, the box had been in a barn, not the holiest of holies. So under Saul's leadership, they were making offerings, making atonement for the people, and God wasn't there. Talk about a form of godliness, but denying its power. It's the definition of it. But what God does is he raises up voices and leaders to bring reformation to society. And that's the power of this one verse. It's David on primetime television saying that box that's been stowed in a barn, we're going to go get it and we're going to put it at the center of society. I believe this one thing is the answer to everything. He had nations surrounding him. If you think America is divided today, it was more divided in this moment because Saul had a group of people that were allegiant. Their allegiance was to him, and David now is coming forth as this rebellious like warrior who people had a narrative made up about him, and man, they were polarized. You had the Democrats and the Republicans, and here's David not addressing the need for reconciliation, not addressing the economy, not addressing foreign enemies. He says this is the answer to everything. It's a profound thing. And so we know what he does. It was literally, the ark was 7 miles away from Jerusalem. So David makes this plan, and he goes, we're going to get horses or ox, and we're going to create this man-made carrier for the ark, made of boards, and we're going to build a structure, and they put it on there. And so they start bringing the ark to Jerusalem. So David's starting to fulfill this and put it all on there. He set 2 guys by it. You know what their names were? Uzzah's one. Gonna go bad for Uzzah. Ahio's the other. A-H-I-O. Ahio. Everyone's saying Ohio. So these 2 names are really, really important. Uzzah and Ahio. Ahio, I believe it's Ahio. The 2 names mean this. I'm pretty sure it's Ahio. Ahio means brotherly. Brotherly. Which is just, brotherly. So we put brotherly right here. And then Uzzah's on the other side as they're bringing it in. Do you know what Uzzah means? Uzzah means strength. So they put brotherly and strength next to the box. And brotherly and strength are walking in this man-made cart with the box. Again, guys, we're going to pursue the ark, and this is God's will. And they start pursuing it, and things start to get shaky. The ox, I don't know what happened, but their plan goes awry, and the ark starts to fall. And Uzzah, which means strength, reaches up to uphold the ark, and what happens to him? He dies. What's my point? The presence doesn't need our strengths. The present doesn't need the brother's strengths near it. And if I look at one of the things today, so many communities are gathering around the brother's strength, the brother's gift. And I'm for gifts. I'm hopefully using mine today, and you use yours, but our gifts have to be unto the enthronement of the ark. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so David Think about him after that comment. We're going to pursue the ark. I'm like, the ark, that box, that's religious. No, people die. We got bigger issues. And so this person dies. Well, David, think about what's going on in David at this point. David's got to be scratching his head. This was in your heart. This was your desire. What in the world? So do you know what David does? David stows the box away. He's like, get it away from me. And so he puts it at Obed-Edom's home. Do you know how long it was in Obed-Edom's home? 3 months. It's in Obed-Edom's home. I love when it's in Obed-Edom's home. It says his entire household was blessed. I think Obed-Edom was a Gentile too. I'm pretty sure he was. But he stores the box. And so for 3 months, the box is there. And David has some soul searching to do. And he's asking God a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Like, how did that happen? Lord, you've brought reproach to my reign. You brought reproach to what I said I was going to do. How did you strike out in anger and kill Uzzah? And at some point, he read the Torah and he discovered that there's a tribe called Levi. And in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 8 and 9, Levi was assigned by the Lord not to fight battles, but Levi was assigned to tend to and minister to the Lord. It was their assignment by God. And so in 1 Chronicles 13, Uzzah dies. 14, David builds a house for himself. In 15, we restart the narrative of David pursuing the ark. And he takes a totally different approach because he got God's design for putting the ark at the center of society. And look at 1 Chronicles 15. It says, now David built houses for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent. Here's David's tent. The ark is going into a tent. This is not Moses' tent. This is David's tent. Moses' tent was functioning on Gibeah. David's tent was erected on Mount Zion. Everyone say Mount Zion. This is at the center of Jerusalem. He builds this tabernacle. And verse 2, it's so crucial. Then David said, no one is to carry the ark of God but the who? The Levites. For the Lord chose them to carry the ark of God and to minister to him. What's that word? Forever. Forever. They would minister to people. No, that's not what it says. They would preach sermons. That's not what it says. They would attend church. That's not what it says. Fill in religious activity. That's not what it says. Well, what does it say? It says they will minister to him. This is the primary priestly call. And you're like, but that's Old Testament. They're Levites. What are you talking about? Well, guess what? The Levites were priests. They represented man to God, and they ministered to God, and they represented God to people. And when you got born again, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, can you put that one up there? It's really, really good. 1 Peter 2, 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal, what's that word? A royal what? A royal what? A royal what? A royal what? You're a royal priesthood. You've been given a priestly call as a believer. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who's called you out of darkness into the marvelous light. So we collectively are a royal priesthood. You have been ordained to be a priest of the Lord. Chosen for that. What's my purpose on the earth, God? What's my destiny? Well, let's start with you being a priest. Let's restore that in our hearts first. And in 1 Chronicles, go back to 1 Chronicles 15, verse 2, it says, I'm going to choose these priests, and the way we're going to restore the presence back to society is that I'm going to take this chosen group of people, and they aren't going to deal with the needs of your hour. They're not going to deal with the needs of your hour. The people were in rebellion. I believe they were backslidden. I believe this was a very dark time in the nation of Israel. But he says, what we're going to start with is we're going to align a few hearts, and they're going to start ministering to me. And so David does that. He puts the Levites around the ark. And if you read 1 Chronicles chapter 15, I'm not going to read it in its entirety, but the primary function and expression of these Levites ministering to him, it was personal. They would put the ark on their shoulders, but it would be surrounded by musicians and singers. Musicians and singers were at the core of it. And you can just go through and read about the skilled singers, the instruments and music and harps and lyres and loud sounding cymbals to raise sounds of joy. That ministers to the Lord. That's one of the ways, and one of the primary ways we minister to the Lord is in that. And so if they bring the ark of God into the center of society, they pull it into David's tent. Now let me tell you about David's tent just for a second. I told you David's tent's different than Moses' tent. So here's your 30-second elevator spill on David's tabernacle. You can always think of Moses' tabernacle, and the difference between David's tabernacle and Moses' tabernacle is, first, David's tabernacle had no divisions inside of it. It was one giant room. David's tabernacle was one giant room. And the last blood offering made at David's tabernacle was at the threshold of the tabernacle on this day when the Levites were bringing it in the procession. They would slaughter, I believe it was an ox. They slaughtered a bull. They slaughtered something. Blood was shed at the threshold, and the ark came into the tent of David through that blood, and that would be the last blood shed in or around David's tabernacle. There would be no more blood that was shed. They would still shedding blood at Moses' tabernacle, but not around David's tabernacle. And then David's tent would be established for 33 years. Everyone say 33. It's prophetic of someone else who would live 33 years. It would be 33 years. And during those 33 years, this box, which was the token expression of God's presence that David's saying we're going to seek, David, in his influence and with his power, he began writing checks funding the employment of 4,000 Levites to minister and tend to the box in that room. There would be 288 singers that would be broken up into, they were broken up into, if you divide 12 by 288, I believe it's 12. Am I right on that? No. Someone divide 12 by 288. I've got it on some notes that are well within here. I just can't find them. What is it? 44. 24, there it is. Yes, 24. So that's 24 hours. I knew it. So they think they established 12 singers. I think it's an hour to sing continually before the Lord. But the point is they would sing and play and minister continually, nonstop before the Lord. What's the point in all this? Why are you sharing this? Because I believe David was a man after God's own heart. And I believe David, I believe it's 4 times in the Psalms that he saw the heavenly eternal tabernacle. He gazed into the eternal realm where God dwells. And David, being a man after his own heart, wanted to create a resting place on the earth like there was in heaven. And so David put the ark in this tabernacle, put singers and musicians around them, emulating or following the model of what was taking place in heaven. Because right now around heaven, there's an ark, and his name's Jesus. And he's seated on a throne, and surrounding him are 4 living creatures, 24 elders, and probably hundreds of millions of angels. And they're all fixated on him, and they're offering praise and worship, not because it's their job, but because it's the only right way to approach him and respond to him. And in establishing that reality on earth is so crucial. And I believe one of the ways God is going to bring reformation and revival to a generation, he's going to restore this Levitical mandate. And I actually believe it's going to restore purity in a generation. That they're going to stand in the holy place and minister to him. Does this make sense? Like, I'm very concerned about I believe one of the things, the restoration of the Tabernacle of David, I believe it cleanses God's people. And I'm concerned personally about the struggles and the compromise that exists in the church today. I love the preaching of grace. I love the revelation that we have of grace, that we're his beloved and his chosen. But grace empowers us into a new identity. And that new identity is that we are righteous and we are holy. That compromise, hidden sin, secret sin, addictions, those are not normal to born again believers. And I'm not saying this isn't like heavy-handed at all. I just want to paint a higher reality. And I believe it's because we've settled for less than we're called to settle for as his people. And do you know, this is incredible to me. As I was studying the Levites and the role of the Levites, why did God choose the Levites? And I shared this on Thursday night, but it's hitting my heart this morning, and I just want to go there. But we know what happened when Israel came out of Egypt and they went into the wilderness. God was looking for a people to do one activity. What was the activity? He wanted a people to worship them. He wanted a nation that would worship him, that would worship him, and he would establish order and bless them, and they would be a witness to surrounding nations of his nature and his character. And so he came and he wanted to make covenant with them. And we know the story. Moses goes up the mountain. He receives the 10 commandments, and he comes down the mountain. And what does he find? He finds idol worship. He finds compromise in the community. Are you with me? And so Moses, this is something I never saw. Moses, and it's a lesser covenant, but when Moses sees this in Exodus, let me find it in my Bible. Oh, this is going to be so good. In Exodus 32, verse 25, look at this. Now, when Moses saw the people were out of control, this is God's people, they were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control to be a derision among their enemies. Then Moses stood in the gate. So the gate's an entry point. Moses stood at the gate, and listen to what he said. He said, whoever's for the Lord, come to me. So he stands up in the midst of rebellion, in the midst of idol worship, and he stands up, and the leader calls those that aren't in compromise to himself, and he goes, whoever's for the Lord, come to me. And this is one of the details that I never got. But do you know who came to him? And the sons of Levi gathered together to him. This was before Deuteronomy 10, 8, and 9, where they were the chosen tribe that would minister to him. But the Levites didn't walk in compromise when the nation was. And Moses stands in the gate and he goes, who is for the Lord still? Where's the remnant, more or less? And the Levites gather to him. And do you know that the mandate, once they were the tribe that would minister to them, do you know that they were not allowed to fight battles? All the other 11 tribes were commissioned to fight. If you're 20 and upwards, you're fighting battles. But Levites weren't allowed to fight battles. They were consecrated and set apart, and they were called to minister to the Lord. But look at this. This would be the last battle the Levites would face. Because look at what happens in 32:27. Moses says to the Levites, every one of you put his sword upon his thigh. Go to and fro throughout gate to gate, camp to camp, and kill every man his brother with his friend, every man his neighbor. Meaning the Levites took their swords and they cleansed the camp from rebellion. How many people died this day? Do you know how many? 3,000 Israelites were struck dead because of their false worship. And do you know who killed them? The Levites. That's an intense narrative. but it's super prophetic. It's very prophetic. Because I believe God would take the Levites' swords, and the cleansing of the nation would go from, hey, listen, we're not going to cleanse the people this way any longer. But I'm going to make covenant with you, and the new way we're going to cleanse these people is, Levites, drop your swords. Here's some scalpels. And the Levites would take scalpels, and instead of shedding the blood of men, they would begin shedding the blood of animals. And they would shed that blood, and they would make offerings on altars on behalf of the people's rebellion from there forward. But it was a prophetic ministry and a prophetic picture of a lamb that would be slain who would atone for rebellion forever. And so listen to this. How's the church birthed? The church birthed in Acts chapter 2 with 120 priests gathered in an upper room, praying, ministering to the Lord. And what happens? God pours out his Spirit to reveal the lamb that was slain. And how many people are saved? 3,000. But listen to this. Do you know how they were saved? The first response of the 3,000, or the first description of the 3,000, is, you know how the description of conviction falling upon them, do you know what it says? It says they were cut to the heart. They were cut. They were cut to the heart. They weren't cut to the heart, though, by a physical sword. They were cut to the heart by a spiritual one that pierced the depths of their being. How did that come forth? I believe it came forth through 120 consecrated ones gleaning upon the righteous one, creating an environment or a gate in their region where the spirit of revelation could come through and pierce the hearts of those that didn't know him. So powerful. That's the first time I've ever explained that. It ministered to me. So you just take it what you will. I was just kind of eating it. I'm like, man. We need to return back to the Lord. And I just like, his ways are not our ways. And I'm really thankful for how the Lord's being proclaimed in our day. I think there's some amazing gifts and voices. But we need a movement that can't be defined by man. We need a movement that can't be defined by a gift, a person. We need a movement that's defined first and foremost by love-sick followers that are beholding the beauty of the Lord. It's the, I think, defining mark of the church. When the people of God were in rebellion in the Old Testament, when they had turned their backs on God, God would always raise up a king or a priest, mainly a king. And do you know what that king would do? That king would reinstitute Davidic worship at the center of society. And every time he did that, revival broke out among the people. There's 7 moves of God in the Old Testament. All seven involved Davidic worship. And when Jesus returned to the temple in the flesh, when the word tabernacled among us, Jesus is the tabernacle. When the tabernacle had eyes, feet, and hands and could actually walk into the temple, he showed up and he rebuked the leaders and the people of the day because he said, my house shall be a house of prayer. What was he saying? He was saying, my house is to be marked by this heart. When I come in, people should be ready. And David got that. And I believe Jesus is raising up leaders that will give the people back to him. That he'll be Lord once again. That we won't enthrone lesser realities. We won't enthrone gifts. We won't enthrone this or that. I'm thankful for all that's happening in our hour, but we need to get mesmerized once again with the person of Jesus. Selah. And you're like, well, what would that look like today? It's a good question. Let me tell you what it looked like for Evan Roberts. On Sunday, February of 1904, during a prayer meeting led by Pastor Joseph Jenkins, Jenkins asked for personal testimonies. Some tried to speak on other issues, which happens when you get people giving personal testimonies. But Jenkins redirected their focus to the Lord. It's a good pastor. There was prolonged silence. Then suddenly, this is how it all started. Then suddenly, a young girl named Flory Evans rose to her feet and spoke softly with a trembling voice. And this is what she said. I love the Lord Jesus with all my heart. That's it. There was a journalist who was present that day that wrote about it. It says the pathos and the passion of the avowal of that young girl acted like an electric shock upon the congregation. One after another rose and made the full surrender, and the news spread like wildfire from place to place that the revival had broken out and that souls were being gathered to the Lord. I love the Lord Jesus with all my heart. 100,000 people came to the Lord over the year. It was marked by, I'm just gonna give you some details of it, and I'm gonna end by telling you what happened in that nation, but it was marked by a passion for singing. When one man was asked if he thought the revival could spread to other countries, he replied, "Can the people sing?" That is the question to be answered before you can decide that. The revival has not strayed beyond the track of the singing people. It has followed the line of song, not of preaching. There was another quote, this is it. There was a noticeable absence of preaching during the revival, not because it was devalued, but because great preaching had preceded and precipitated the move of the Spirit. As one man said, these people, all the people in a land like ours, are taught to death, preached to insensibility. The time had come for a response.